Frameworks, Charting a Course to Explore the Story of Stories, Part 2. By Brooks Crenshaw, June 30, 2024. Note, this article is part of a series that will explore the useful concept of frameworks and their applications. Throughout the series, we'll examine how these frameworks influence our understanding of the world, our roles within it, and how they guide our actions and decisions. The magic stays in the book. Picking up directly from the previous thought, one part of the New Testament that I view as a very important mechanism for distinguishing it from our current reality is Christ's claim in Matthew chapter 12, and later in chapter 16. A wicked and adulterous generation seeketh after a sign, and there shall no sign be given unto it, but the sign of the prophet Jonah. This is Christ's reference to his own resurrection, as both were in their respective, though temporary tombs for 3 days, per the story. But in Paul's second epistle to Timothy, the author refutes the notions of other teachers who have strayed concerning the truth, saying that the resurrection is already past, and they overthrow the faith of some. This is supremely important, because it distinguishes the one-time literal from the continual metaphoric and places the supremacy of value on the latter. Just as every Old Testament concept and artifact has a spiritual or metaphoric twin, the Ark of the Covenant is a literal totem representing the individual's heart, as written in ancient Jewish customary language, or what we might refer to as the mind or seat of understanding or model of reality. So Christ's crucifixion and resurrection is the literal, per the story, that is performed figuratively within the individual. The killing off of the parts of you that are inadequate to make room for the ideal within you, figuratively, Christ, is the only sign you get. In other words, the magic stays in the book, all you get is the working metaphor within you that makes you more of what your potential has to offer than otherwise. Considering the physical to metaphoric paradigm shift from old book to new book, how else would a species of upright apes learn deep metaphoric meaning but through 1,000 years of physical totem? It's like this. You and I are playing touch football in the backyard against 2 of our friends. As we huddle up for the next play, I use a pebble to represent me in relation to the line of scrimmage and a matchbox car to represent you, the receiver, in the route I want you to run before I throw you the ball. The pebble isn't really me any more than the matchbox car is you. But their use as avatars was necessary for me to take the complicated sequence out of my head and place it into yours. That's the purpose of the literal in story, particularly as a primitive people advance to higher and higher levels of understanding reality, though remaining woefully inadequate along an infinite scale. Parable, timeless truth is greater than singular historical event. The headline might be off-putting to you, and that is not my intention. Bear with me a little in what you might perceive to be my folly. Too often, people assume that because I remove the idea of a singular historic event from the calculus, that I am making the claim it didn't actually happen. This isn't what I mean by this. What I mean by this is that in terms of value, the timeless truth of the story is higher in value and deeper in truth. While I've got your take on how Noah got every species in the ark paused, as we agreed on earlier, I'm asking you to consider the notion that what is most deeply true about a man finding grace in the eyes of God and, through faith, preparing an ark to the saving of his house, transcends the question of a one-time, or possibly repeated, historic event. Again, I don't deal in those claims one way or another because I no longer entertain questions at that level of analysis. I've done this in favor of the transcendent. Christ taught in parables. Per the book, the ideal divine figure used stories that, while they may or may not have happened, the underlying value is more profound and meaningful than that question. Or perhaps they happened so many times in our human development that it bears repeating as an archetype. This is the same way that a jiu-jitsu practitioner might consider side control, guard, or north-south, as they are common positions 2 people grappling on the ground find themselves. This is archetype, in a sense. Repeating patterns in humanity that bear repeating as likely to be encountered. Christ told the parable of the talents in which a man going on a journey entrusts his property to his servants. He gives each servant a different number of talents, a form of currency, according to their abilities. One receives 5 talents, another 2 talents, and yet another, 1 talent. The servants who received 5 and 2 talents invest the money and double their amounts, while the servant who received 1 talent hides it in the ground. When the master returns, he praises the servants who invested the money and rewards them. However, he rebukes the servant who hid the talent and orders that the talent be taken from him and given to the servant with 10 talents. From the story, we can likely infer that, had the last man invested the talent and lost it, he would have fared better with the master, which implies a deeper meaning to the story than sheer accounting. Question: does it matter whether the 4 men in the story existed in a historical sense? It is likely that in this case, those men have existed so many times in similar contexts to the parable that it bears repeating. But in this exploration, we find a meta-truth. If the ideal man is using story that may or may not have happened historically, then the precedent is set that this is a mechanism used by the divine, regardless of what we make of that, whether deity or reality itself. This mechanism means we can set aside the pursuit of archaeological and scientific proof of the literal as the justification for acting it out, which is belief. Per the story, a wicked generation demands magical proof first, and the proof is only found in the doing. It's truer than quote, "it happened." As true as the parable of the talents. Expectation versus reality. This mechanism is of supreme importance as it lays bare the notion of human systems formed around expectation versus the reality, read, God, that unfolds despite and in opposition to that human system. This is demonstrated in the Hebrew texts that told of a coming Messiah. Whether in Genesis regarding the bruising of the heel on the head of the serpent, the picture of the death of Christ as he overcomes death and the adversarial spirit, or in any number of the writings of the prophets, there is an expectation of what is to come. The Jews of the day were looking for a Maccabee-style warrior king who would avenge the children of Israel and reunify the kingdom. George Lucas did a brilliant job emulating this dynamic as a literary device in the figure of Anakin Skywalker/Darth Vader, of whom it was said that he would bring balance to the Force, though not the way in which anybody predicted. What the first-century Jews in the story got was something so completely different, their own preconceived notions blinded them to reality, or God as it were. By the same token, what makes you any different from them? Is your grandmother's handed-down version of the rapture or the end times any more reliable than the Jews' understanding of what was to come based on their book? This is merely a mechanism to properly instill humility into one's model, avoiding rigid orthodoxy and staying limber enough to recognize the truth manifesting in a way you weren't expecting, which happens enough times it bears inclusion into the story. Values, the trajectory of a changing species. As I stated in the exploration of the story of the 3 little pigs, the archetypal third time is a charm requires a first point of reference accompanied by a second point of reference from which to infer the relationship between those points to understand the world they inhabit, and therefore place the third point in a masterful and accurate manner. We, as a species, at any given time beyond the 1st century, are the third point of reference to the 2 fixed points of the iterative Hebrew and Greek testaments. A carpenter needs 2 points to draw a straight line, though given our human tendency and lack of accuracy, 3 is a sure thing. Consider the 2 biblical epochs as the 2 points of reference. They form a trajectory, but toward what? In my theological pursuits I observed a rule that one butts up against from time to time when trying to extrapolate from the ancient to the modern. God says, "I change not." And in the very true sense that we previously explored, the nature of reality doesn't appear to change. But change is constant within it. Was the ancient tribal man of King David's era the same type of human as the 1st-century Jew in Rome? Further, are we, the near cyborgs of the modern age, the same type of human as either of them? Per the story, God doesn't change. But we do. We understand the nature of pathogens, germs, and viruses in a way that outmodes the need for whited sepulchres, graves covered in lime-based whitewash. It's pretty amazing that without our understanding, this system existed. The whitewash both served as a marker, a warning to stay away from it, while the calcium oxide of the lime has antimicrobial properties. It worked, regardless of whether or not they knew how. It worked because it was written by reality, in a sense. Or, the law aligned with reality. Granted, there are also ways in which we haven't changed and possibly never will, something likely worth exploring in the future. How should we be? What should we do? What should the rules be now, given what we are today and the landscape of our understanding versus the different understandings of our predecessors? A partial answer to this can be found in the word agape, a word that often gets conflated with our understanding of the word love. There are multiple Greek words for various forms of English love to include philia, our most common understanding of the notion of affection. The actual depth of meaning and context of agape would be lost to the sands of time, save for a bit of code within the text itself that preserves its context, per the algebraic notion from earlier. John in his second epistle writes, "And this is love or agape." Meaning, what follows next is the algebraic definition of agape, per the story. "And this is love, that we walk after his commandments. This is the commandment, that, as ye have heard from the beginning, ye should walk in it." Okay. God is love, love your neighbor, love your enemy. All of the Christian tradition that landed it the reputation for rendering its adherents into weak, deferent people and Christ being passive in the face of conflict is a bad read of the word. The love illustrated in agape means to walk within a set of values and to hold both neighbor and enemy in the same light within that objective structure of values. To the best of my assessment, it is a love for objective truth over all else. But what commandments are we to keep in this structure of values? Should we abide by rabbinical traditions? Are shellfish out? Must one be put to death for gathering sticks on the Sabbath? There is a key inquiry required at this point in the exploration. Who decides what the commandments are? For, as Thomas Sowell rightly points out, the most basic question is not, what is best, but, who should decide what is best? Even if one wishes to structure their life and values in alignment with this set of received imperatives, they still must determine how. Something the postmodernists got right, despite the abhorrent conclusions and resulting prescriptions that followed, is that there is an endless number of ways to interpret reality, the world, the text. Their conclusion is that because there are infinite claims for what is true, that there is no such thing as objective truth. They assume that because it is difficult or even at times impossible for us to measure something, the something isn't there. So, what are the commandments per agape? Paul writes to Corinth that they, the Corinthian followers, are metaphorically a written letter of Christ, quote, written not with ink, but with the Spirit of the living God. Not in tables of stone, but in fleshy tables of the heart. That is the wrestling match each individual must pursue in their own conscience. It is the straight gate that resembles the birth canal and that you must squeeze yourself through by getting rid of the parts of you that prevent you from fitting through it. This is the wrestling that Jacob had to perform with the angel. It's Jordan Peterson's notion of wrestling with God. This is an individual pursuit, not a collectivist one. And your rules might differ from mine, but exposure to one another's models of how to be is a part of building up one's own house, from earlier, oikodomio, to stand the test of time and to be a blueprint for the houses being built by those around you. In review, these mechanisms. God is greater than or equal to reality, or God equals reality. The magic stays in the book except your own personal metamorphosis. The use of historically nebulous parable by the ideal renders the question of history lower in priority to the truth being explored. The use of the two biblical epochs as a type of rear and front sight through which to infer its utility in any given era, along with other mechanisms we encounter along the way, are part of the set of frameworks we will use to explore more of the depth of the eternal story and its meaning. I am primarily concerned with ideas, values, and helping individuals to become everything of which they are capable while pursuing the same for myself in service to that mission. I am generally skeptical of organizations for the reasons I've previously laid out regarding inevitable corruptibility. But it is also crucial for every religious institution to have the right to determine their own rules and customs. In the same spirit of the grand experiment of federalism, households, counties, metropolitan areas, and states all set laws and customs in an experimental fashion that likely guarantees innovation while reducing and isolating misery, stagnation, and tyranny. Though, as the grievance Marxists conquer both church and state with the same mental contagion that seduced Cain, per the story, it becomes reasonable and necessary for aligned organizations to cooperate in resisting this encroachment. May we hang together, as the old adage goes. Brooks Crenshaw is a writer, columnist, and speaker who focuses primarily on philosophy, economics, and history, particularly the importance of story. With a background as a naval special warfare intelligence professional and an economic advisor and director of research for the Commonwealth of Kentucky, he holds an MBA from Vanderbilt University. We hope you have enjoyed this audio version of the Deadless Thread Substack publication. If you'd like to support our work and stay updated on future articles, please subscribe to the Deadless Thread at brookscrenshaw.substack.com. And follow on Twitter X, @CrenshawActual for more insights and discussions. Thank you for listening.